Hey guys, Cliff the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about this mount, which is a strain wave gear or harmonic drive mount, and it so happens to be one of the cheapest on the market. It's not super cheap by any means because it's $1,280 but it is cheaper than the ZW-AM3 while sporting better specifications, and of course far cheaper than the ZW-AM5 while having specifications that are actually in between the AM3 and the AM5. And this is the UMI 17 Lite by a company called Mia Astro. I'm not even making that up. Or I think they're rebranding themselves these days to Proxisky. And I'll put the links, of course, down below if you are interested in that. This mount is very interesting in that they chose to make it into a kind of a modular system where the wedge part of the mount and the mount itself can be removed from one another. And very simply, I can get with the UMI Lite on one side and its wedge on the other side, which sounds a bit pointless at first, to be quite honest, although there is I can think of two use cases for that. One use case would simply be that you want to, travel with this, and having the mount side and the wedge side separate makes this easier to fit in your backpack or whatever. Okay, that's a viable explanation. Another explanation is that you just are interested in doing visual today. You're going to a very dark site, you don't care about astrophotography, you just want to have like a small scope, maybe a Celestron C5 or something like that. You need an alta-azimuth mount, and this fits the bill. Basically very close to something like the Ioptron AZ Mount Pro, right, which was extremely popular and a very good mount in and of itself, and in the same price range. How would that work? Well, there are threads at the bottom of the mount itself. So those are standards 3/8 of an inch tripod threads. So any tripod that supports those threads, I can plop the mount down and use it visually. It broadcasts its own Wi-Fi and Bluetooth networks that you can use the Mia Astro free app on iOS or Android to control the mount. It's very similar to the Skywatcher app for like the AZ GTI or some mounts like this. And so that's the reason I can think of for having a separate wedge. It comes with another advantage, which is that you can use whatever wedge you want. This is a standard dovetail there, Vixen style. So you could be using a William Optics wedge or something else that might be better than this one, although it is fairly robust, even though we'll get back to this a little bit later, because I do think that this design also comes with drawbacks. Anyways, taking a step back, I need to start with a full disclosure. This was sent to me by Proxisky / Mia Astro for me to review. I thought originally that it was a loaner item that I would need to return, but they actually clarified after I had received it that this was actually a gift. So I am getting this for free besides taxes, and therefore you should be aware of that. I got something of value for this review effectively. That said, I have full editorial control, and I can say anything negative or positive I want about the mount. In terms of specification, this is a very interesting one. The mount on its own like that is 2.8 kilograms, which means that it is extremely light if you just want something to throw in your backpack together with like a small refractor or small SCT or a Maxutov Cassegrain telescope, and then carry to a dark site for visual astronomy. But when you add the wedge to the equation, you get quickly to 4 kilograms, which is basically slightly heavier than something like the AM3. And at the same time, the AM3 is overall more compact than this placed into the dovetail. This is actually larger than something like the ZW-AM3. So where does this redeem itself? It redeems itself through its specifications. It has, for the right ascension axis, it uses a NEMA 42 motor paired with a Type 17 strain wave gear drive, which is the same as what's in the ZW-AM5, and it affords higher payloads, which is always a good thing. The declination axis uses a NEMA 42 motor paired with a Type 14 strain wave gear drive in it, which is the same as the ZWAM3. So you can see that spec-wise, it sits effectively between the ZWAM3, which costs $1,500 US, and the ZWAM5, which costs $2,000. And in terms of weight, it is basically on par with the AM3 while being cheaper and having higher specs. Fun fact, while I was preparing this video, I had a look at the specs page for the ZWAM3, and they had the specs of the AM5 on their product page for the AM3, which is a bit of an issue. I'll let them know, but that was kind of weird because in the end, right now, it's like false advertising. So let's be careful, guys. Anyway, going back to this little mount here, it claims to be able to carry 10 to 13 kilograms without any counterweight, and to be able to carry, I think, 15 to 18 kilograms with counterweight, because it does come with a counterweight bar that has an interesting attachment system to the mount. We'll get to that in a moment. Because I'm not sure I would ever trust this mount to have a heavy scope on it. And the reason isn't the mount, it isn't the torque that's available, it isn't the motors, it is that I don't feel so comfortable with a standalone wedge that is connected to that only via, at an angle, only via this tiny counterweight bar. Now, to be fair, the wedge itself has this very nice knob to tighten this dovetail saddle here, so that the mount is really it's fused in place effectively. So I'm sure that it would be possible to use with like higher payloads, but I didn't really quite dare to do so for now. And so for now, for the purposes of this video, I've used it with a Red Cat 51, and I'll show you how the setup looks like a bit later in the video. So taking a step back, what came with the mount? So the mount and the wedge together are provided with the mount, and Proxisky also has an issue on their webpage, which is they claim currently that the wedge is both part of the package and an optional accessory. So it should be good to clarify that, as far as I understand, it is part of the package. Otherwise, it would be fairly useless as an astrophotography mount, making the price point lower than the AM3 worthless. It also came with a nice and quite small case for the main body of the mount and a counterweight bar, together with a counterweight bar adapter that you screw into this. And you might be wondering, like, okay, what's going on there? What is this? Well, it also comes with what is effectively a finder shoe and the screws to attach it to the bottom side of the mount. So you're supposed to use 4 screws to attach the basically the finder scope saddle onto the back of the mount, and then you slide your counterweight bar with the adapter into that finder scope saddle. And while it fits very snugly in place and it's meant to carry up to 3 kilograms of counterweight, I don't know if I would completely trust that system. Again, it's like, I feel like they probably did all their tests. They probably tested this mount with like large heavy telescopes up to 10, 13 kilograms without counterweight. They probably made sure that the 3 kilograms counterweight was no problem on the mount. They made sure of all of that. But for me, my perception is that I am stressed out. I don't feel like using this with larger telescopes, and that's purely my feeling. And I feel that Proxisky should probably like release videos on their website or whatever where they have good results with those large telescopes, and maybe I'll try at some point in the future to put something heavier on this. But for today, it's going to be the Red Cat. Now, there is something else to note about the mount, is that when I received it, it was dead on arrival. Which is never a good thing. Basically, what happened is that I think it was the declination axis that worked, and the RA didn't work at all. So I was, connecting to the mount. The mount was connected to a 12-volt power supply, and then I connected to the mount via Wi-Fi and via their smartphone app. And then I moved the mount in declination. No problem. This moved. And then I tried to move the mount in RA. That didn't work. Oh man. So I did contact Proxisky about that, and they were surprised. They had tested this mount before sending it to me, so you should be aware of that as well. And it just didn't work. And I suspected immediately that there was something wrong with the electronics that were connected to the right ascension axis motor. And so I asked permission and instructions on how to open up the mount to check that. The good news is the mount is extremely easy to open. There are 3 screws that you can use to remove the cover. Then you have access to the main board of the mount, which is held in place by 4 additional screws. And then that's it. It's very easy to repair on your own. So what I did is there is a connector for the RA motor and a correct connector for the deck motor. I switched them and then I saw that the RA motor was working and the deck motor was not working. So it was definitely the electronics, the motors and drives were fine. So obviously Proxisky had immediately suggested that they send me a new mount, and I returned the current one and I said, no, just send me the board. And that's what they did. They sent me a new board and I replaced it and everything started to work. Now they tell me that obviously if that happened to a real customer, they would have the customer support and service replace their mounts. Or, you know, I guess they could also replace just the board if the customer feels comfortable about doing that. I know Ioptron does a lot of stuff like that. And I think it's really good because this is like very close to right to repair. In terms of repairability, this mount is a 10 out of 10, easily. Definitely easier than repairing a smartphone. But it doesn't change the fact that it was dead on arrival. Anyway, I'm going to place this mount on a very sturdy tripod. I'm going to put the red cat on top of it and we'll look at the final assembly and my impressions with like polar alignment, the wedge quality, the mount quality, etc. After that, we'll of course look at the guiding results of the mount together. Here we have the setup that I'm going to use for the initial tests with the UMI 17 light. So obviously we have the UMI 17 light that is put on its wedge, so the wedge that comes with the mount, and it is on top of my super sturdy tripod there that I bought in Japan. I made a video about that tripod. I'll put the link up above or down in the description if you want to have a look. It's an amazing piece of kit, and I wanted to make sure to have this tripod to make sure that, you know, we had a very stable platform to test this particular mount. And on top of the mount, we have the Red Cat 51 with an all ZW setup, including the ASI Air. So everything is made to be effectively very portable and very light. And the reason I'm going with that for now is that I think this is probably the main use case for this type of mount. It is a competitor to effectively the AM3, and from a specifications perspective to the AM5 as well. But with its price and its size and its weight, I think its main use case is going to be paired with refractors and very light and easy to carry setups. If you want something that is going to punch more and support larger telescopes, then, and you want from the same brand, then you want to go towards the UMI 17, the soon-to-be or already released UMI 17R, this kind of like really full-fledged mounts that don't have like a separate wedge. And of course, you can also go with the ZWAM5, you can go with the Warp Astron WD17 or WD20. It's completely up to you. And while I hope to do more tests for now, I already used this mount during a live stream that I had recently on the channel. I put the link up above and down in the description, but it's over 3 hours long, so it might be a bit boring for you guys. And when I tested on the live stream, I was actually very disappointed by the performance of the mount because I was only able to get guiding numbers around 0.9 arc seconds to 1 arc seconds. 5 years ago, I would have been elated with those numbers, but today I've gotten used to really good guiding numbers, and that was disappointing. But then I realized that I had set up the ASI Air as if the guide camera was using a 120 millimeters guide scope, even though it is on an OAG, so I should have set up the double of 250 millimeters. As the focal length of the guide scope, which tells us that the real RMS, the real guiding performance, was around 0.5 arc seconds. So, which is obviously much, much better. And I want to confirm this tonight by having the proper setup in the ASI Air, and of course, in the end, downloading the PHD2 logs of the ASI Air onto a computer so we can analyze them with PHD2 log viewer. Let's talk also a bit about the wedge. I have done polar alignment with this wedge during the live stream, and it's a standard wedge, basically. It's roughly on the same level of the integrated wedge of the AM5, I would say. And it comes, of course, with the obvious drawback that at the end you need to lock the axis on your wedge, both the altitude and the azimuth axis, and I see two issues upon using it. The azimuth axis, it locks fine, but I feel I wanted to have like knobs that had more grip on them so I could tighten more to make sure that there is no wobbliness on it. That said, it seems to be perfectly okay with the tension that I put in, so it's a gripe that probably is without any real foundation to it, or any real substance to it. The real gripe is with the altitude locking knob. I've actually used it twice now. The first time it bumped off my polar alignment by 20 arc minutes, the second time by 10 arc minutes. So I feel there should be something better to do with this wedge, and definitely you will want to have like the locking knob kind of like halfway locked when you do your adjustment, so you don't suffer too much from the bump at the end of the polar alignment. So it's not a good thing, obviously, but the good thing is that at least you should be able to use this with other wedges like the William Optics wedge or some others that are available. Do not use it with the Star Adventurer wedge, please, please, please. The mount, besides the polar alignment issue, it seems to be pretty robust, and it seems to have some play, but not so much. So it is doable, but this whole structure does not make me does not make me feel safe enough to put like a large telescope on top, unless it was in alt azimuth mode, so in visual kind of mode. Since it has better specs than the AM3 in right ascension, how well do you think the mount will perform with the Red Cat in terms of guiding? If you have an RMS figure in mind, we can take bets on that. Pause the video now, go to the comments and tell me what is going to be the guiding figure. Keep in mind that Tokyo has very poor seeing at most times, and I was using a target, I think M51 as a target for the guiding, which is at declination 47 degrees, if I believe, so this is actually nicer to the mount. So let me know down below in the comments. While you're doing so, you can like the video, it takes a second and it really makes all the difference. And if you're new to the channel, you may consider subscribing, in which case, welcome to the channel. If you want to help me more directly and you want to buy anything from Agena or High Point Scientific or First Light Optics or even Amazon for that matter, if you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you want to help me more directly, of course, you can become a channel member. It's a join button next to the subscribe button, or you can become a Patreon paid supporter on Patreon. Link is in the description. And channel members, Patreon members, you guys make all the difference. I say it every time, this channel would not exist without you, so thank you so much. So now that we're inside, we can have a look at the guiding results of our little mount there, modular mount between the wedge and the mount itself. Very interesting design, but how well did it guide with that tiny telescope on top, which I think is really the main use case for this kind of very portable strain wave gear mount? Well, in my opinion, it performs quite well. We can see the guiding results here from the ASI Air, and we have 2 hours worth of data here, and you can see the total RMS was 0.55 arc seconds with 0.2 in right ascension. That is a really, really good result, especially from Tokyo, where the seeing is so horrendous. Now, as the target M51, which is at 47 degrees declination, meaning it is not the worst place to be guiding at, it's not that close to the meridian, so that's something to keep in mind. Then if we go later during the night, especially when the galaxy starts to be really into the Tokyo smog, the guiding gets worse. But by worse, I mean 0.75 arc seconds. Which is still very decent. And this is via off-axis guider. So we have the full 250 millimeters focal length of the Red Cat 51 to use to estimate our guiding rather than a tiny guide scope like the ZW mini guide scope. It should be noted that I did do something to enhance the guiding results. I increased the aggressiveness of right ascension past 100% to 130%, and that did enhance the results. My exposures, because I was doing via an OAG, I kept them at 1 second long, but it might have been even better at 0.5. That said, with 0.55 arc seconds during the first half of the session, and during the second half, 0.75 arc seconds, I don't have much to complain about. How well would it perform with a heavier payload? I don't know. I might know in the future because, as I mentioned, they gave me this mount. So I'll keep using it, but I think my main use for it will be as simply as a mount to carry my small Red Cat 51 for going, to dark sites and playing with my equipment at dark sites. Now, it should also be noted that, like pretty much all of those, except the ZW strain wave gear mounts, but all of those mounts from China, they are using an open source control system called OnStep, all of them. And I've seen that with UMI, because this is the case with this mount, it uses OnStep. I've seen that with Warp Astron, it uses the OnStep protocol. And I've seen that with another mount that I'm reviewing, which is the MCAN Astro EM31 Pro. Let me know if you've heard of it. I'll be very impressed if you have. And again, that one is also using OnStep. That said, both the Warp Astron and the MCAN Astro use a controller design and software that is exactly the same. It's a fork of OnStep called Teen Astro, and it has its limitations in terms of interface. It's a bit clunky, and the terms used are a bit weird, like guide rate is actually slew rate, and pulse guide rate is actually guide rate. Some kind of weird stuff going on there. And that's because they're using this vanilla open source fork of OnStep, which is called Teen Astro. Very interesting stuff. Now, Mia Astro or Proxisky, whichever you want to choose, decided not to provide a controller with the mount. Instead, the mount creates its own Wi-Fi hotspot and Bluetooth hotspot connection, whatever, that you can connect to from your smartphone and then use an app on iOS or Android to control the mount. And that app has the proper terminology. So it has guide rate as guide rate, it has slew speed as slew speed, and you can change all of those from the app. You can change the horizon limits, meridian limits, and I'll also say that the default meridian limits were set in a way that is going to work for most people. So that is very good. I also want to give a quick word about the meridian flip. So as I mentioned earlier, this mount is based on the OnStep control system, and its default settings, if you go to the app, to the settings limit section, you'll have the availability of a meridian east limit and a meridian west limit. Both of those are set by default to 0, and they should be kept at 0. The way that you will want to do the meridian flip in both Nina and the ESI Air is that you will want to pause the mount tracking around 4 or 5 minutes before the meridian, and then you want to have the flip done around 4 or 5 minutes after the target has passed the meridian. Both of those are very easy to set up in either Nina or the ESI Air. This does mean that you are not able to image the target as it crosses the meridian until the last moment, let's say 10 minutes past meridian, when you do the flip. I actually tried originally to set the east limit to 10 degrees, so to allow the target to pass the meridian while I was imaging and then do the flip, but that didn't work. And this is because with the app and not having a hand controller, I don't have access to an OnStep parameter called the preferred side of peer setting, which I would normally need to set to east for the northern hemisphere for this track past meridian and then flip thing to work. This is a very confusing and difficult feature of the OnStep controlling software, but with the UMI 17 Lite or with any really OnStep mount, if you set those limits to 0, and then you pause before meridian and you flip after the meridian, everything is going to be fine. From mounts like Warp Astron or also the MCAN Astro EM31 Pro mount that I'm also currently reviewing, with the hand controller I have the ability to change the preferred side of peer option of OnStep, and then I can do that tracking past the meridian, but that means that for the UMI 17 Lite it's actually not available. So overall, that mount, at least with the small payload that I put on it and pointed at an object that is not that close to the meridian either, still it performed really well between 0.55 and 0.75 arc seconds RMS. That is really good. And I'm kind of getting used to that. All of the mounts that I'm testing and reviewing, they have really good guide results, especially from a poor seeing like here in Tokyo. That said, I'm not sure I'm such a big fan of the modular design. Because maybe it's not the case, maybe it's just me imagining things in my mind, but I don't feel like putting a heavy scope on the mount, which kind of makes the whole specifications of the mount of like up to 10 to 13 kilograms without counterweight, and then up to what was it, 15 to 18 kilograms, I think. But yeah, like all of those super high weights of payload that are available, I don't feel like trying them out, right? I feel like this is a mount that should be used with a small telescope. And so its main advantages would be if you are into visual as well as astrophotography, switching, like you have a really light visual out as mount. If you were someone who had like the AZ Mount Pro from Ioptron, this is excellent, this is awesome. And you can control it from a smartphone app. That's great. And when you add a wedge to it, you don't have to bring the wedge if you're not going to do astrophotography, so you only have those 2.8 kilograms. That's really impressive. But then you add the wedge, you get towards 4 kilograms, and then you can use your small telescope and maybe even the big telescopes. But again, this is not something that I would dare to use. At the same time, because the wedge has its own issues, the polar alignment isn't that great, right? The locking knob in the altitude bumped my alignment from 10 arc minutes to 20 arc minutes. Fortunately, something I probably didn't mention before, the alignment was bumped in azimuth, so side to side. So it was fairly easy to actually correct that via the azimuth. And when I locked the azimuth itself, it didn't seem to bump the polar alignment. So that was good. That said, I wish I could lock the azimuth tightening screws more. They're very smooth and kind of difficult to grip and to lock. And like if you're in the middle of winter and it's super cold and you're trying to lock that, it might be a bit of a nightmare. But overall, personally, I think like unless you're doing visual and you like having this mount separate and you like being able to carry those pieces separately, it makes more sense to me to have a design like the AM3 from ZW, where you have a unibody design, and because of that, the mount in general is more compact. And it's also slightly lighter at 3.9 kilograms. So it's really a matter of priorities and what you prefer. And if you're really on a budget, but you really want a strain wave gear mount, then at $1,280 it's not cheap, but it is one of the cheapest strain wave gear mounts around. I think the only cheaper one is from a brand called Huawei, but I've never seen one of those in the wild. So effectively, in the international market, it's kind of like the only option that's available at that price. But if you're willing to go to $1,500, then you can get the AM3. I haven't tested that one, so I don't know how well it performs with those Type 14 drives on both axes compared to Type 17 on the RA of that UMI 17 light mount. But that's definitely an option. But you also have the other UMI mounts. In the $1,500, $1,600 range, you have the UMI 17 non-light. You have the upcoming UMI 17R, which uses servo motors, as I understand it, with direct drive, just like Warp Astron does, and that I really liked in the WD-20. So it's all a matter of budget, what you're willing to spend, and what your objective is. Overall, for my own needs, if I were to buy a mount, if they haven't like sent it to me like that for free, without even me being aware of that it was for free, then I probably wouldn't have bought it, because it doesn't really fit my style. I probably would have spent the extra dough on probably like something like the UMI 17R or maybe the Warp Astron WD-17S. But that's me and that's my own opinion, right? What are your thoughts? What do you think of this very interesting kind of design mount? Would you buy it? I don't know if you should. It really depends on your use case. And I think I've been going on and on and on about this. So you're now aware of, I think, the drawbacks of this design as well as the advantages of this design. So completely up to you. And let's not forget that for me, the mount was dead on arrival. So there is the part about the support. How well will UMI support you if you have issues? The big advantage is apparently UMI has a big fan club. In the comments on my videos, whenever they see something related to UMI, there's tons of comments about it. People seem to be very happy with their UMI mounts, and their first international customer was one of the lead developers of Nina. So it probably has to count for something, but it's still something to keep in mind. I'll have the links, of course, in the description if you're interested. But again, what are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be really interested to see what you think of this. With that, as always, thank you so much for watching. When you're leaving a comment, you can also like the video. It takes 1 second, really helps. If you're new, you can subscribe to the channel, in which case, welcome. And of course, if you're planning on buying anything from Agena or Hypon Scientific, First Light Optics, even Amazon, and you do so after clicking the links in my description, you will help me out at no cost to you. Always appreciate it. But more important than all of that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.